They tell a story about a young man who came to apply to an Israeli yeshiva, a Sephardic guy, wanted to go to this top-notch Lithuanian Ashkenazi yeshiva in Jerusalem. And he comes to the office of the Rosh Yeshiva, and the Rosh Yeshiva says, "Can I help you?" And he tells him, "I want to become a student here." And the Rosh Yeshiva takes one look at him from his head to his toe. He says, "You want to be a student here?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "I don't think it's going to work." He said, "Why? I want to learn Torah. Nafshi chashka b'Torah." He says, "I don't have enough seats in the Beit HaMidrash." He says, "Rabbi, it's not a problem. I can bring a chair." He says, "Yeah, the problem is not the chair. The problem is there's nowhere to put that chair." He says, "Rabbi, so you see the sliding door? I'll sit on that side of the sliding door with my own chair." He says, "Yeah, but I don't have any extra stenders to give you to put your Gemara down." He says, "Rabbi, I can bring my own stender and my own chair, and I'm going to sit outside the glass door. It's going to be okay." I said, "Yeah, but the problem is that in the dormitory, I don't have enough room for you to also have a bed in there." He says, "My mother lives just around the corner from the yeshiva. I can sleep at my mother's house. I bring my own chair, bring my stender. It's going to be okay." And the rabbi says, "Yeah, the problem is you're going to come to the shiurim, and all the shiurim are in Yiddish, and you don't speak Yiddish." He says, "Rabbi, I can learn Yiddish." He says, "What do you can learn Yiddish? English you don't understand. Yiddish you want to understand." I said, "We don't want you in our yeshiva." I think part of being part of a Sephardic community especially is wondering, how could it be that all of our talent is always running elsewhere? Elsewhere into the arms of people that don't really want them. Why are we going there? What's the story? And we look back for leadership, I can tell you that I know of at least 7 or 8 pulpits in the United States looking for Sephardic rabbis. If you want to move to the US, we have I don't recommend taking a pulpit in the Sephardic community in general, but there are many openings, and the reason is we can't find people to fill them. There's going to be no people that want to step up to the plate and take on this job offer. And so we have the opposite phenomenon, which is all kinds of wonderful Ashkenazi rabbis that they decide, "Oh, I can handle a Sephardic pulpit." Little do they know, it's a lot more complicated than being the rabbi of their local Ashkenazi synagogue. And you look around and you wonder, what's going to be with the next generation of Jewish people? Who's going to lead Am Yisrael on the path that we don't think is the only path, but the path that we feel is the correct path for ourselves? And before I ask that question, I want to read to you a piece from Rabbi Yosef Faur, who Sina translated into English in his book, but because I gave away a copy of your book, I couldn't add the English translation. I know where to copy from. Harav Faur, in the introduction to his book, Rabbi Yisrael Moshe Chazan, Ha'ishu Mishnato, the man in his teaching, source 2 on page 1. He writes, "HaSefer hazeh ben chodesh yamim." My book here is 1 month old. "V'chibarti b'zman she'eno lo yom v'lo layla." And I wrote it in a time that was not day and not night, meaning I had no time to write this book, but I wrote it anyways. "Hadevarim yiduim." These things are well known. "Kimat ve'en behem min hachadash." There's almost nothing new about this book. Afal pike, nonetheless, every Jewish author that you see says, "There's nothing original in my book." They are the most original works in the world. Rabbi Moshe Chaim Lutat on the direction to Misrat Sharim, there's nothing special about this book. Uvda, that so many years later, everyone's still trying to study the book. I decided to write them down. Ki darkam shel harabanim haSefaradim. It's the way of the Sephardic rabbis. Yitzirotehem bechol chelkei machshevet Yisrael. The way that they thought about all the things that belong to the Jewish people. והשקפותיהם על היהדות בכלל ועל בעיות הזמן החדש בפרט, and all of their opinions regarding things that happened in the past, but especially things that are happening now that we need real answers to, אינם ידועים. Almost nobody knows. I was sitting at a dinner table and someone said, "You see Sephardic philosophy. What exactly is Sephardic philosophy? You guys just have different food than we have." And that's true. If that's all you know, then that's all that there is. And that's what the Chambor is saying. There's almost nobody who really understands what exactly Chachmei Sfarad came to bring to the world. משהו נורא והיום, something terrible, חל בכל אשר נוגע למסורת התרבותית, הדתית והחינוכית של היהודים הספרדים בימינו. There's something devastating that is happening to everything that is cultural, religious, and educational in the Sephardic community. דברים שבעבר הקרוב היו ידועים לכל צרובה דרבנן, things that in the very recent past, every upstanding Torah scholar knew, אינם ידועים היום אפילו לאלה אשר בשם גדולי הדור יכונו. There are things that yesterday every rabbi who graduated from the Beit HaMidrash knew them, and today people that are called the Gedolei Hador, they have no idea what the things the rabbis knew 50 years ago. Anu, those of us שגדלנו על פי המסורת החינוכית העתיקה, those of us who were raised on this ancient educational tradition, שנתקיימה דור אחר דור בבתי המדרש הספרדים, which continue to exist in all generation after generation in the Sephardic houses of study, רואים את המצב החדש בדיכאון לב וכיליון עיניים. We see the current state of affairs with a broken heart We're worried. Hagesharim im ha'avar nehersu. The bridges to our past have been destroyed. Hatzionim shamdu be'em haderech nekrum. All of the milestones, the markers along the road have been taken down. Hashvilim tushteshu v'chusu afar. All of the roads that led back to our tradition have been wiped away and covered with dirt. Ma yaseh hana'ar sherotzeh legalot et ha'avar shelo. What will happen to the young one who wants to learn about his tradition? La'an yifneh, where will he turn? Mi yoreh lo taderech. Who will show him the way? We're living in a world, we talk so proudly about a Judaism, that almost no one understands. That almost no one knows how to articulate. I gave a shiur recently in Los Angeles, a place called Sephardic Temple. It's a very interesting place. I gave a shiur, and after the class, someone came over and said, Rabbi, all of the things that I've been feeling the last 40 years of my life, and I didn't know how to say them, you just put words to them. And I said, Baruch Hashem. Thank you for telling me that. Because the whole purpose of everything that we try to do, and it's not just myself, it's Rav Kada, it's Sina and the Chavura, it's all of those that are involved in this type of Limud Torah, are trying to articulate, not create something new, but to articulate to the new generation, what is it that we've been working so hard to keep? It wasn't the dafina on Shabbat or the lachma bajin on Friday. None of those things mattered as much as the educational tradition that we've worked so hard to preserve. But it shouldn't surprise you that this is happening, and it shouldn't depress you either. Because what's going on in our generation is a sign of the imminent redemption. If you look at me in source 1, the Mishnah says, Bikvot Mashiach, in the times approaching the Mashiach, Chutzpah is game. Chutzpah, you know the English word for that, will reign supreme. V'yoker yamir hagefen titen piryam, v'yayin b'yoker u'malchut te'afech leminut. The vine shall bring forth its fruit. Wine will nevertheless be expensive. Could be gasoline also will be part of this. The monarchy, the kingdom shall turn to heresy. Ve'en tochachat. And there's no one to give reproof to the Jewish people. Beit vad yel iznut. The Beit vad, the place where Chachamim used to study, will become disloyal to the Jewish people. The houses of study will be disloyal to Am Yisrael. Ve'agalil yicharev. The Galilee will be destroyed. And a lot of other bad things. If you look in the next part, v'chumat sofrim tisrach, and the wisdom of the sages will become putrid. V'rechet ima'esu, and people will begin to hate the truly God-fearing individuals. V'haemet tien ne'ederet, and truth will ultimately disappear. Naharim penei zakenim yelbinu, the young generation will disrespect the face of the older generation. Zakenim ya'amdu mipenei ketanim, the elders will have to stand up, meaning they'll be forced to respect the new, younger generation. Ben minavel av, a son will disregard his father, more worse, disrespect him. Bat kama be'ima, a daughter will stand up against her mother. Kala b'chamota, I don't know why this is a sign of the imminent redemption. A daughter-in-law will fight with her mother-in-law. That's literally the history of the world. It's nothing new. Oivei ish anshe beto, the enemies of a person will be the members of his own household. Pnei hador kifnei hakelev, the face of the generation will be like the face of a dog. I know in the Western world we think dogs are cute, but in the world of Chachamim, a dog is the most hideous creature that could possibly exist. If you ever ask your Sephardic grandmother if you should get a pet puppy, you know exactly what her answer was. Haben eno mitbayesh me'aviv, the son has no shame in front of his father. V'al ma yesh anu lishaen, so after painting this wonderful picture, so what is there left to rely on? Al Avinu shebashamayim. Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu is able to get us through what we're experiencing right now. And so I'm bringing you two messages. One is we're experiencing all of this. Number two, it means that the Geulah is imminent. And number three, I said two, three, I can't count, I'm a rabbi. And number three, that the only way we'll get through this is by turning back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rabbi Yosef Mesas, in source 3, tells us about a generation where the rabbis, every time they would speak, it was like there were people flocking to the rabbis. You should know there was a time in New York when the Jews were coming over from Eastern Europe. There were these rabbis who would give these sermons, and they had huge auditoriums full of people, not just of Jewish people. Also Christians would come to these sermons. Why? Imagine you had no entertainment at home. It's Shabbat afternoon. All the churches only open on Sunday. There's no movie theater. Movies don't exist. The opera house was very expensive. The only place you're going to get a good entertainer is in the Beit HaKnesset. The rabbi speaks for 2 hours, and people flock to hear the rabbi because it's like going to a movie over the weekend. You want to come to this sermon, and then on Sunday you go to the church, and I don't know where you go on Monday, but there's entertainment. It's free entertainment. Says Rabbi Yosef Masas, there was a generation that when rabbis spoke, They had full packed houses and auditoriums. He said they spoke so much, even when they spoke about messianic matters, meaning things that have no relevance to anybody's life, there still was an audience to listen. Unfortunately though, that's not exactly the case anymore. When rabbis speak, the rooms are not filled to capacity. And he's crying over this fact that the wisdoms of the scribes will putrefy. He didn't just experience it among the people, he experienced it among the rabbis that he visited as well. Rabbi Yosef Massas was a rabbi born in Morocco. He finds himself in Algeria, in Tlemcen, being a rabbi. At a certain point in time, he started reanalyzing whether the Kabbalistic traditions he was involved in were really things that he should be doing or not be doing. One of the things that bothered him was a formula that many people say in the morning, L'shem yichud kucha b'richu shchinte. In the unity of Hashem's name, I will unite the Yud K and the Vav K and the Yichud Hashem name. He wanted to understand, I'm saying something, I feel like a parrot, I don't know what I'm saying. What does it mean? So he decided, listen, no rabbi is going to answer me, I have to find a Kabbalist. And so he set out to go look for a Kabbalist in Morocco. If there's anybody here who's Moroccan, I'm sorry in advance, I'm Moroccan also, but what can you do? Ufizman hazeh, he says, nowadays, Tama v'nishlema chokhmat Kabbalah me'arei ha'ma'arav. He said, clearly the chokhmat Kabbalah has disappeared from the cities of North Africa. V'tachtei amda Kabbalah chadasha atzet balei hadimayon. And the only Kabbalah that is left is the Kabbalah of people with very wild imaginations. Mili'am al kol gidoteha. It is overflowing with imaginations. Rak chilufei otiyot v'gematriyot. When you say Kabbalah, it means flipping around letters, upside down, forwards, backwards. You familiar with what I'm talking about? Almost you go to someone's Shabbat table, they tell you Dvar Torah, al pi Kabbalah, it's going to sound like this. The Jewish people in Egypt worshipped the golden calf. It was the worst thing they did. But if you take the letters of gold and the letters of calf and you hold them up to the mirror and then you stand it upside down, really it was a silver horse they were worshipping, not a golden calf. And a horse is like the horse of Mashiach is coming on. That says Rabbi Yosef Massas, that's all that happened. When I hear Kabbalah, that's what I'm hearing. Gimatriyot v'chilufei otiyot. V'sodot me'ulafim b'divrei havaya asher badu melibam b'rekei hamoach. He said, instead of the Kabbalah that I read about in books, I've met Kabbalists who are nothing aside from people with empty brains and very large imaginations. ולמען התהלל במתת שקר, למדו לשונם איזה קטעים מדברי בעלי הסודות הראשונים הנכונים. He said, and in order for these new Kabbalists to continue their teachings, they've adopted earlier Kabbalistic words that were authentic, says Rabbi Yosef Massas, and they mumble them like parrots, so you think that they're the Kabbalists of yesterday. והפכו אותם למורת פתנים, וחזו בקרב ההמון מסעות שווא ומדוחים וחלומות והבלים, they talk about dreams and all kinds of other things, says Rabbi Yosef Massas. ובכן, נסגותי אחור ממנהגי, ובטלתי אמירתה אצל עצמי, מאחר, says Rabbi Yosef Massas, I stopped saying L'Shem Yichud, because I couldn't find one person in this whole country who would give me an answer for why it is that I'm saying what I'm saying. What's Rabbi Yosef Massas telling you? He said, there used to be Mekubalim, and there used to be Mekubalim Nechonim. Said, but today the people that are filling in their shoes, they don't even know what they're talking about. So I went to ask them a question, because they're supposed to be the experts in the things that I'm doing. And I went to the experts, and all I found was emptiness and nothingness. But it's not done. He says it used to be that in the city of Miknas, where he came from, it was a city full of Chachamim and Sofrim. He said, but now, he said, you can't even find anybody that learns Torah. I said, I'm the only guy left over here that knows how to learn Torah. And you're dealing with a new world. A new world in which Sephardic communities that yesterday were full of Torah, were overflowing with knowledge and wisdom, all of a sudden, they became a desolate wasteland. Places where nobody was studying Torah. It sounds harsh. I'll explain to you just a moment exactly what happened. Rabbi Yosef Massas in source 6 and 7. Some say Mashash, some say Massas. It depends where you come from and how you read his name. אני לא אמרתי, הוא אמר. What? Oh yeah, very good, exactly. Rabbi Yosef Massas that ever since the French came to Morocco, the world has changed. He said, whoever says the world changed for the better is right. The French brought about things to North Africa that they never had before. Said whoever said that the French came and changed the world for the worse is also right. Because the French came to Morocco and brought things there that never happened before. Said Rabbi Yosef Massas, both opinions are right. There's good things that happen and bad things that happen. And one of the bad things that happened, he details here at length, is that the young generation finally realized you could live a good life. You could wear nice clothing. You could travel to nice places. You could build yourself nice houses. You could do all kinds of things they never thought about doing before. and the desire to fit in, the desire to be wealthy, the desire to run after all kinds of things they learned about right now, changed the world, not for the better, but for the worse. There was a young generation that said, why should I sit in the Beit HaKnesset and pray all day and learn Torah? I want to go be a businessman. I want to go travel across the world. I want to be a, whatever imagination the French created. So it'll be to change our world. So the only people who were left were a handful of people left learning Torah. There's a famous Chacham. I mentioned him last night. His name is Professor Tzvi Zohar. Should live and be well. HaKadosh should bless him with a lot of health and hatzlacha. Professor Tzvi Zohar is ethnically not Sephardic, but he's probably the last of the real Sephardic Chachamim left in the world right now. If I had to tell you that single-handedly he has maintained and restored Sephardic traditions to the world, if it wasn't for him, there are so many things we wouldn't know about ourselves. Professor Tzvi Zohar, in the introduction to his book, Rabbinic Creativity in the Modern Middle East, says, how did it happen that Sephardic communities of yesterday that were full of Chachamim ended up in a world which was the exact opposite of that? Let's read together on page 2 on the left. Study of Torah is a core cultural religious ideal in Jewish tradition. There is no Jewish community, Ashkenazim, Sephardim, Temanim, Chassidim, wherever you go, Jewish people learn Torah. Look at the walls of this room. It's covered in books. You go to other places, it's covered in statues and idols, not Beit HaKnesset, other religions. You come to Beit HaKnesset, it's full of books. Jewish people have always studied Torah, no matter where they went. However, this tradition disapproved of individuals who sought Torah knowledge as a vehicle for social status and economic success. Sometimes people want to be a rabbi for the wrong reasons. Economic success, I don't know if we ever discovered in the Rabbinate yet. When you come into a room, people stand up for you. You go to a wedding, they kiss your hand. All kinds of, kavod medumeh. You get all kinds of false flattery that you get in different places. Sometimes people go into the Rabbinate for the wrong reasons. Says Professor Tzvi Zohar, the traditions that viewed learning of Torah as important always disapproved of people who use the Torah for the wrong reasons. In large cities, a Talmid Chacham could be a head of a bedin. He could be the head of a kollel. He could lead Jewish organizations that covered the whole country. And in smaller cities, on page 3, he could be a sofer, he could be a shochet, he could be a mohel, he could have a little bit of knesset, a side job, but there always were jobs in the rabbinate. On page 3, communities throughout the Middle East had chosen chief rabbis for themselves for hundreds of years. However, in 1835, the Ottoman Empire decided to accord official recognition and status to chief rabbi in Istanbul. There's a famous professor, his name is Professor Yaron Harel. He has a book written on the corruption of the chief rabbinate once the non-Jewish authorities started appointing chief rabbis. All of a sudden you had Talmidei Chachamim, and you had chief rabbis that were appointed not by the Talmidei Chachamim, they were appointed by some Muslim cleric in some place, and that led to problems. Many years of intensive and in-depth Torah study are required in order to reach a high level of Torah scholarship. But since during his years of study he would also need to make a living, the opportunities of a young man to devote himself to Torah study were affected by the economic situation of his family and his community. And therefore, during the time period of 1850 to 1950, about 100 years, not only the objective economic situation affected the channeling of the necessary means of funding for Torah, cultural factors also intervened. So for instance, many wealthy parents who in the past wanted their children to be Talmidei Chachamim. Why? Jewish parents always wanted their kids to be successful. Don't be at the bottom of the barrel. Get up, do something. I don't know if I could tell the joke in the UK, but I'll tell it anyways. They say, of course we killed Yeshu. His parents wanted him to be a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, and he chose to be a carpenter, so they killed him. That's how it works in a Jewish family. And in Jewish families, the parents always push their kids, do more, accomplish more, study more, be greater. And so the greatest position you can have in the Middle East of 100 years ago was to be a Talmid Chacham. You could be the chief rabbi, you could be the chief rabbi of a city, you can have your own Beit HaKnesset, you could be a Dayan, you could be all kinds of things, and that was such a source of pride for parents. But then there turned a generation of, why would you be a rabbi? What kind of job is that for a good Jewish boy? Now you could be a doctor. Now you could be a lawyer. Now you could be a traveling salesman. There's all kinds of things Jews can do today that are much higher in the food chain than being a rabbi. And because of that, parents stopped funding their children to become Talmidei Chachamim, and instead they pushed them into the arms of other. And last time I was here, no one should accuse me. Last time I was here, I spoke about the importance of having a profession and studying secular studies. So nobody should think here that I view every person should go to the Rabbinate and sit in kollel. Not the point. The point is, though, that within a number of years, says Professor Tzvi Zohar on page 4, that even though the populations of Jews grew in countries like Iraq and Syria and Egypt, the number of rabbis continued shrinking as much as the population kept growing. And so, for example, the famous yeshiva in Baghdad had 60 students in 1848. 30 students in 1863, and in 1879 had only 20 students left in the yeshiva. In Aleppo is known as the capital of Limud Torah in the Middle East. Aleppo went from being the center of Torah study. In 1933, there was only one yeshiva left, with about 20 students studying Torah in the entire city of Aleppo. Rabbi Yonatan ben Shimon tells us in Egypt, it was the same thing. And here, Professor Tzvi Zohar concludes, and I don't remember his number, that at the end of the era, there were maybe, I don't remember the number offhand, 1,000 Talmidei Chachamim that were left in all of the Sephardic countries at the turn of the century. How did it happen? It happened because it wasn't the most lucrative position anymore. Parents weren't so thrilled their kids would be rabbis. The children were looking for other things to do. And what happened to the Torah? The Torah diminished, it fell apart. A few people were leading a lot of people, and the really good scholars, especially once we came to places like Israel, or the United Kingdom, or the United States, we decided, listen, if you would ask me now, you have a son, where would you send him to Sephardic yeshiva in the United States? You know that I know of no such place? I know of no Sephardic yeshiva in the United States. Even the one or two Sephardic yeshivot we have in the United States, Panovich and Brisk are more Sephardic than they are. And so where am I left to send my children? Nowhere. So where do you send your children? And then the cycle starts all over again. Even if we do have Talmidei Chachamim, where were they raised? Where in Aigo yeshiva? Where did we grow? And this cycle continues and continues and continues. And what's left is a tradition that literally becomes erased. Our Chachamim tell us in Masechet Avot, I didn't come to depress you today. Rabbi Yishai ben Perachia says, who was Rabbi Yishai ben Perachia? Remember I mentioned the guy that we killed because he wanted to be a carpenter? Rabbi Yishai ben Perachia was the rabbi of Yeshua Notzri. Rabbi Yishai ben Perachia taught us, Aseh lecha rav, make for yourself a rabbi. Ukneh lecha chaver, and acquire for yourself a friend. What does it mean, kneh lecha chaver? Who speaks Hebrew? Tikneh chaver, what does it mean? Buy yourself a friend. Meaning, if you can't have a friend, hire one. It's so important to have friends. Even if you have to pay somebody to be your friend, you should pay someone to be your friend. Don't be alone. And judge every human being favorably. We talk about aseh lecha rav. We have to have rabbis. But we're telling you now, the last 20 minutes, we don't have rabbis. So how do you make yourself a rabbi? What's the purpose of having a rabbi? Many people think that having a rabbi, I mentioned last night, is so you can outsource your brain. You don't want to learn Torah. You don't want to know Hilchot Shabbat. You don't want to learn Hilchot Kashrut. So what do? You don't have patience to attend Dayan Kada's 8-part series on Hilchot Shabbat and the Chavua. Why? Because who cares? Hilchot Shabbat, if I have a question, I'm going to call Rabbi Nassim and say, Rabbi, what do I do on Shabbat? What if you have to call him on Shabbat? That's why I said, Shabbat is complicated, because on Shabbat you can't Google anything. Shabbat, you're stuck. You don't know what to do. It's the one thing you actually have to have a book about in your house. Because if you can't find the rabbi and you can't go online, so what are you going to do? I have to look in a book. But aside from that, people don't learn Torah anymore. Why? Aseh lecha rav. They were very observant of this rule of making for yourself a rabbi. I know nothing about my Judaism. I outsource my brain to my rabbi. And you assume your rabbi is a good guy. So here you're lucky. But there are a lot of people who outsource their brain to another rabbi. And lo aleinu v'lo alechem. You don't know the kind of things that happen there. What is the purpose of having a rabbi, says the Rambam? Aseh lecha rav. In source 10 on page 4. V'afilu lo haya ra'ui liot lecha rav. Aseh oto lecha lerav. Even if he's not worthy of being your rabbi, make him your rabbi. Why on earth would I make someone my rabbi if he's not worthy of being my rabbi? It depends on the role of a rabbi. Kedei shetisah v'titen imo. You need a rabbi in order to argue with. Sounds very Jewish? You need a rabbi not to fight with, like to make his life miserable. Other kilo do that very well. You don't have to do it here. They're machmirim, mehadrin, mina mehadrin, fighting with the rabbis. It means you have to have someone to argue. Vitkayem talmudcha biyadcha. You're in the middle of learning something. When I call my rabbi to ask a halachic question, I say, Harav, in this situation, what do? He'll never answer me. He says, tell me what you think you should do. What are all the sources you've studied until now? I tell him, I read the Gemara this way, I understood the Rishonim like that, the Acharonim say this, and I'm having a hard time differentiating between this Acharon and that. What should I do? Now I can argue with you. So we have a conversation, and in the end, he never gives me an answer. Do whatever you think is right. What's the purpose then of calling the rabbi? You're not to get an answer. The purpose of having a rabbi is to call someone to be able to have an intelligent conversation with about the topic that you need more clarity on. So that means that in order to have a rabbi, you have to be very learned. That's the whole purpose of having a rabbi. The Chuppah writes in source 11 that literally the Arabic means that a person has to tachlifu da'ot. You have to know how to exchange opinions. When I look at a Jewish community, and I look at the Rabbinate of the Jewish community, I know that the Rabbinate of the Jewish community reflects the Jewish community itself. The Jewish community gets the rabbis they deserve. And I mean that with all the weight that I mean it. And when we're not learned, so what do you expect from our rabbis? Today, you know how easy it is to become a rabbi, by the way? You could do it online. You don't have to go anywhere anymore. It's a new world. Yeah, but how long do you think a rabbi studies to be a rabbi? That's a good smicha program, 6 months. 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, 12 months. You have a hard, serious rabbi. 18 months. What does he learn? How to salt a cow. I don't know any rabbis who study Hilchot Mikvah. I wish. At least it'd be useful for something. How to salt a cow, how to not mix meat and milk, a few other things. Okay, maybe they have extra course. Another 3 months Hilchot Mikvot. At the end of the day, why do we have such rabbis? Because what do we know? And all they have to know is they have to know a little bit more than us. That's how you become a rabbi. But if we knew a lot of Torah, if we learned Torah, do you know what kind of chachamim we would have? I live in a generation that I'm embarrassed that people think I'm a rabbi. You know why? Because I learned by real rabbis. And they say, oh, rabbi, I know who I am, I know what I am, I know what real rabbis actually look like. But we live in a generation that, it's an interesting world. Rabbi Yosef Kapach is telling you, the Rambam's understanding of Asedech Harav, your rabbi is only going to be as good as you are. So when I look at the Sephardic world that is falling apart, and people are complaining, the rabbis are not doing enough, and the rabbis that we have, they're influenced by Ashkenazi teachings, all the complaints, I hear them all, I live those complaints. What are you doing about it? What are the Kehillot doing about it? They're very good at changing it. The same one that fight with the rabbi, they're very good at changing the rabbis. There's a Chinese proverb. It says, beware of the devil who replaces him. You never know. You think this guy's bad? Wait till you replace him, it's even worse. We need a world in which people learn Torah for themselves. Rabbeinu Avraham, the son of the Rambam, in source 12, he says, what does the pasuk mean? Hinchem atem kulchem tiyu kedoshim, that all of you should be holy. Says Rabbeinu Avraham ben Rambam, there are some religions in which the holy man is the individual, the imam, the priest, the bishop, whatever he is the holy man. And what about the rest of the people? Shaar anshe haida mishar omot nisharu beefkerut beniuf vezulato kemefusam. And the other people, they're busy doing all the sins in the world. They're evil people, but as long as they come on Sunday, Hail Marys, it all works out. I remember as a kid watching The Godfather. Probably shouldn't have watched it as a kid, but anyway. You see these mafiosos. They're in the middle of murdering people, throwing their bodies in the Hudson River, and then they come to church, they give a nice donation, Hail Mary, Shalom Aleichem, everything is great. And you look in your head, how does that work? How does that work that you could kill people, but today it works the same way in the Jewish community. You kill people, you throw their body in a different river, and then you come to Beit HaKnesset, you write 10 times Chai to the Beit HaKnesset, and it's good. How does that work? It works because we've adopted a culture in which only holy people have to be holy people. Only the rabbis have to be educated people. The rest of us, we can do whatever we want. Says Rabbeinu Avraham ben Rambam, that's the meaning of the pasuk, that all of you must be holy, meaning all of you must be Talmidei Chachamim. You don't have the ability, you don't have the luxury to say, my rabbis will lead us and we'll just be blind followers. It doesn't work that way. You have to be an individual, a Talmid Chacham. And then, Bezrat Hashem will bless you with the type of rabbis that we need to lead us. The Rambam actually codifies this, the halakha in source 13. Kol ish miYisrael chayav b'talmud Torah. Every Jewish person is obligated to study Torah. Whether you're wealthy, whether you're poor, whether you're healthy, whether you're not. He mentions on the top of page 5 that the great sages all had professions. They all worked. Working was not an excuse to not learn Torah. Simply, their limud Torah was the main thing they did with their life, and working was there to support their career of learning Torah. So until when? How much Torah do I have to study already? Says the Rambam, ad yom moto, till the day you die. There's never going to be enough Torah that you learned. A person has an obligation, according to halakha, to be a Torah scholar. It's an unusual thing that things that are already written down in books, we still call rabbis to ask questions about. Rabbi, how do I do this? Did you read Shulchan Aruch? No. Someone came to me recently. They were complaining, they don't like the kashrut of my house. They don't like what I do in my house. I said, okay, well, we're Orthodox Jews. Forever we've been doing that. They tell me, my dear friend, do you know where in Shulchan Aruch the laws of kashrut are found? I said, I'm not asking you like chapter, verse. There are 4 volumes of Shulchan Aruch. Do you know which of the 4 volumes of Shulchan Aruch laws of kashrut are found? No. If I would open up the laws of Shulchan Aruch for you, would you be able to read them and translate them? No. So you tell me you've been shomer kashrut for 40 years. How can you be shomer something you don't even know where it's found in the Shulchan Aruch? You think you keep kashrut. You have no idea what kashrut is. You think you keep Shabbat. When's the last time you learned Hilchot Shabbat? Your rabbi learned Hilchot Shabbat for you and then told you like a parrot what you should do? I have a parrot at home. He talks. But he doesn't know anything he's saying. He just mimics things that he hears in the house. That doesn't make him an intelligent parrot. It just makes him a parrot that imitates words. In order for a person to be a Jewish person, I brought you some stories here that I'm going to skip today. About Rabbi Yosef Massas in Morocco. I encourage you if you can read these on your own. 2 beautiful stories about a woman in North Africa who became Talmidat Chachamot and chose not to get married and not to have children, but instead to dedicate their lives to the study of Torah. And initially the Chachamim were upset. What are you doing learning Torah all day? What are you get married, have a family, that's what you're supposed to do. And ultimately the Chachamim stood behind these women and supported them. Because we also need women who are Talmidot Chachamot. When I speak, you have to learn Torah, I mean everybody has to learn Torah. I met a rabbi from Syria. I was at a Bar Mitzvah. He said, you know who taught me my parasha for my Bar Mitzvah? He said, my grandmother. In where I come from, in the city that I come from, the grandmothers taught the grandsons how to read the Torah. Davar yadua. Why would she not know how to read the Tanakh with Tamei Hamikra, with all the proper cantillation? She taught us. She didn't read in the Beit HaKnesset, but we read for her in the Beit HaKnesset. There used to be a world like that. You live in a very special place. I'm sure that you know Rabbinate Flora Sassoon. You live in a place where you had, perhaps in the last 500 years, the greatest Talmidat Chachamim in the world. Somebody who even managed to make Chachamei Israel of all the denominations respect her limud Torah. When I say that everyone has to become a Torah scholar, I don't just mean the men, I don't mean the yeshivas, I mean everybody. Everybody. In the days of Chizkiyahu HaMelech, King Chizkiyahu, our rabbis tell us you could find a little child in the street and you could say, hey, the food here, is it kasher or not kasher? That, is it allowed to do on Shabbat? And every child knew the answer to that question. Because there was a generation where everybody knew Torah. I want to end off with a piece that I won't read in its entirety. Of a chacham named Rabbi Shimon Agassi. We have some Iraqis in this community. Are you familiar with Rabbi Shimon Agassi? Have you heard his name before? He was a colleague in the generation of the Ben Ish Chai, where Iraq was really being turned over by Europe. Everybody wanted to be European. It was a certain mentality that set in. Schools were opening up, like the Alliance. All kinds of things were happening. New spirits were coming through Baghdad. Rabbi Shimon Agassi is a very unique chacham because he did not take a salary from the community. He was an independent Talmid Chacham who worked his own parnasah. He had his own job. He paid his own salary. And because of that, he records history a little differently than the other Chachamim who were on the payroll of the Baghdadi Jewish community. He also made a few enemies because he didn't care. You couldn't fire him. And he could say whatever he wanted to say, right or wrong, you agree, you don't agree. He had the freedom of speech before freedom of speech was given to anybody. And some of the more spicy things you ever want to read about Iraqi Jewry, you can find in the writings of Rabbi Shimon Agassi. It's unfiltered. All of this piece, I can't tell you I agree with. But Rabbi Shimon Agassi is telling us about the new spirit that had come to Baghdad at the time where people once upon a time used to be chachamim. He says, Shlomo HaMelech says, Lo yadati nafshi. I didn't know what was going on with me. Kilomar ma eneo ma omar ma raiti u'ma nistakalti ma'reya ha'me'agemet nefesh raiti. Page 7, source 17. I see things that are happening in my generation and I don't know what to say, says Rabbi Shimon Agassi. He talks about young men. If I could read you some of his, and only Sephardic rabbis write so sarcastically. Raiti taben, I saw the sons of our nation. Lavush nochri. He's wearing nice European clothing. Mikatzer belyonim u'ma'arich batachtonim. It's a fashion statement that he was making. Miselcel b'saro. He curls his hair. Miyapet enav. He makes his eyes so pretty. Machalik et sandalo liot mavhig. He polishes his shoes every morning before he leaves his house. V'sivrei mirs tachat zerotav. He has all kinds of non-Jewish books under his arms. Holech hashkem baboker leha'eskula. He goes in the morning early to his school. V'chol hayom mitzaftzef bisfat Tzorfat. The whole day is chirping like a little bird in French. And I mean, no offense to the French, but clearly Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon Agassi was not so excited that the Jews were starting to speak French. V'zecher Torat Ivrit lo ya'aleh al dal savadav. He doesn't even know how to pronounce Hebrew properly anymore. Uvevo'om mibet hasefer let hatzorayim. When he comes home in the afternoon from school, v'roeh she'adayin lo yichinu lo et ha'arucha terem bo'o. And he sees that his mom still didn't make lunch for him yet. Hu bo'et beparat bashan hashmena hi imo. He kicks his fat mother, the cow, who didn't feed him well. So what does the mother do? She screams unjustly at the home help, the cleaning help that she has. Why didn't you make lunch for my son? And borrowed from Bilam, the mouth of the donkey, Hashem opened it up. She starts complaining why she didn't give this raven his food. So finally they bring him his food. And he comes and sits on the table. He starts eating like a donkey, no washing his hands, no berachot before his food. And he eats so much food until his belly is popping out of his clothing. He gets up from his table without saying Birkat HaMazon afterwards. And then he doesn't have time to just go home and rest and take a siesta, afternoon, you relax in your house. He has to go to the streets and shopping, and he walks around like a person who has no rest, like a bear that walks with no kippah. And he reviews over and over that which he learned in his school, so he knows it by heart. And what happens in the afternoon happens at night also. He has no Torah knowledge, he has no proper manners, no good character traits. He's a wild animal, not a human being. He's become so westernized that he has no culture left. Forget religion, but also no culture. What's the reason for all this? He said because the Sephardic community was overtaken by this desire to become Western. We need to be Westerners. We'll do whatever it takes to fit into the West. I'll bring my own stender. I'll bring my own chair. I'll even learn how to speak Yiddish. Umidazo, in this character trait, אשר משכה ברסן לחייהם לנתונתם הדרך, העגלון הזה יושב על העגלה, ואוחז רסן הסוסים בידו להטות המרכבה על כל אשר יחפוץ. You ever seen a chariot and a horse rider standing on top with his reins and he's directing the horse wherever to go? כן היינו אנחנו המרכבה. He said, we found ourselves very quickly, the people of the East, we became the chariot. ואנשי אירופה, and the people of Europe, הם העגלון, המתאים אותנו והמנהיגים אותנו ללך בכל דרכיהם. They're the horse rider pulling our reins to tell us, go right, go left, this is okay, that's not okay, this is appropriate, that's not appropriate. And he says, we do everything they tell us. And that's what Shlomo HaMelech means when he says, Lo yadati, nafshi, I did not understand, my soul, klomar, eni yodea, I have no idea, lama nafshi samati kemerkava la'amin adif. How did I become the chariot for this aristocratic nation of the West? Hem anshe Europa, liot matim uti lechol ma shirtzu. How did I become the horse for the people of Europe? Shlomo HaMelech said, I don't know. Mi kafa alai har kegigit idamot lehem. הלא אנחנו אנשי המזרח נקראים, ומה לנו לדרך הצרפתים העליזים? He said, we are considered Easterners. Why do we have to become French? By the way, substitute French with whatever other culture took over our Jewish culture. Says Rabbi Shimon Agassi, we used to be very proud of who we were. We were proud of the way our children were educated. We were proud about the way that our families looked. We were proud of the way that we ate our food. We were proud of all kinds of things. And all of a sudden, overnight, being Western was the most amazing thing you could be. And what happened to us? We became the horses. Everybody told us, go right, we went right. Go left, go left. Dress like this, we'll dress like that. Pray like this, we'll pray like that. Not just by the non-Jews, by the Jews also. We were left, in Hebrew they say, frayerim. We were left becoming the horses that everybody else is telling what to do. Rabbi Shimon Agassi turns to this community on page 8. He says, all of you are waiting for the rabbis to do something. All of you are waiting for the Dayanim to get up and change this culture. All of you are waiting for the Chachamim to get up. All of these rabbis, even if they were decent people, which he didn't have such nice words to say about them. He says, even if you're right about how great they are, he says, they're so busy. They're busy with the community. They're busy with the sisterhood committee meeting. They're busy with everything that rabbis are busy with. They don't have time to be changing the Jewish culture. He says, so who can do it? Only you can do it. Only you can get up and make that difference. And he ends off with his community on the last page, on page 9, apologizing to them. And saying, I'm really sorry. I'm sorry that I've spoken so harshly. I'm making these words also. I'm sorry that I've spoken harshly. So I only spoke this harshly because it matters to me. Because it's something that I'm passionate about. And I feel that if we don't do it, nobody will. And I look at the Jewish community. And you're lucky. You're one of the few Jewish communities led by real Chachamim. I mean that genuinely. There's not a lot of you left in the world. You should travel with me to other Kehillat. I'll show you some things. I tell a story about a guy. He went to a place, he got stuck in the city for Shabbat. I flew here Erev Shabbat. I was afraid I was going to get stuck on the way here. So I took a direct flight, meaning either I'm going to be stuck at home or I'm going to be stuck in London. But I wasn't going to be stuck in Oklahoma airport. I don't know where I would be. I would be stuck somewhere where I knew people. This guy got stuck in a place where he didn't know people. So then he comes to the Beit HaKnesset Erev Shabbat with a suitcase. Is anybody that can host me? And I say, of course, please, come to my house. Well, he takes him to his house, sets up a room for him, he gives him a hot towel, go take a shower, makes him a cup of tea. Bakol Mikol takes care of him. Friday night, brings him to his house, he eats food, sings Shabbat song, Shabbat morning, walks him to the Beit HaKnesset, everything. Motzei Shabbat, they finish Havdalah, Baruch HaMavdil Mikol Shechon. He brings the guy an itemized receipt for his stay with him for Shabbat. The hot towel, that's 5 pounds. Giving you an escort to the Beit HaKnesset, that's 10 pounds. Dinner and lunch and Seudah Shlishit, each one of those 30 pounds. Give him a whole bill, itemized bill, how much he owes him. The guy's astonished. He goes, you're charging me for your Haknasat Orchim? He said, of course, what do you think? This is free. I lost money because of you. So I would have gone to someone else's house. Why would I come to your house? He says, you came to my house, my rules, you have to pay me money. Listen, really, it's not nice what you're doing. You know what, let's do this. We'll wait till Shacharit on Sunday morning. We'll come to the Beit HaKnesset. The rabbi is also a Dayan. We'll go talk to the rabbi. He'll do a din Torah for us, and he'll arbitrate between us. They come to the Beit HaKnesset. This guest is Rabbi. I came out of town. I had nowhere to stay, nowhere to sleep. One of the members of your Kehillat said, please come to my house, stay with me. And he invited me, and he hosted me. Then Motzei Shabbat, he gives me a bill, wants me to pay him money. These are the kind of people you raise in your Kehillat. I said, I'm sorry, but this is a halachic question. I have to go look in my books. Come back to me in an hour. I'm going to look in Shulchan Aruch. He sends him away. The guy comes back after an hour. The rabbi has 20 volumes of books open on his table. And he looks up and he says, what can I tell you? Your host is right. He didn't make any condition with you. This is free. You have to pay him all the money that you owe him. The rabbi says. He starts writing out a check. He goes out of the rabbi's office. He hands a check to his host. And the host says, no, I don't want the check. You don't want the check. He says, I don't want the check. He says, why don't you want the check? I don't want your money. He said, so why did you drag me here to the rabbi? He said, I want you to see what a terrible rabbi we have in this community. I hear the complaints all the time. My sister-in-law, she should live and be well, has on her refrigerator a magnet and says those who say it cannot be done should get out of the way of those who are actually doing it. And for me, this is a motto in which we should live our life. There's so much that we can complain about. There's so much we can say. There's not enough Torah. There's not enough moderation, Jewish fundamentalism, radical. You got all the words. I know the buzzwords. You can do all of that. But it's easy to sit in your chair. Today we have a word for those people. They're called trolls. They didn't used to have a word. Now you have a word. They sit all day on their keyboard and they fight wars, but they don't do anything. They just complain. And then there are a few people, they do an imperfect job, but at least they're doing something. And so you need to do 2 things. 1, to support Birkei Rabbanan HaKoshelot. To say the Chachamim that we know, you have 2 Chachamim here, that are doing the job. B'ne'emanut. To say, I'm standing behind you no matter what happens here, no matter what's going to be said, no matter what's going to be done, we have your back. Don't be afraid. Number 1, restore dignity to the Rabbinate, to those who uphold the truth of the Rabbinate. And number 2, give your rabbis the gift of being an educated Jewish people. When one of the Chachamim come here to speak, they should be speaking to a crowd that has already learned all of Tanakh, that has already reviewed the 6 Sidarim of the Mishnah, that has already finished, not the whole Talmud. A lot of the Talmud is nothing relevant to you. Half the Talmud. all the Agadot Chazal, the sections that are relevant to Halakha. People that finish the Rambam's Mishneh Torah. How long will it take you to finish the Rambam's Mishneh Torah? There are some Hasidic groups that don't even follow the Rambam's Mishneh Torah. They finish it every year. So those of us who follow the Rambam's Mishneh Torah, at least we should study it once in our life. If they do it every year, at least we should do it once in our life. How long will it take you? A year. 3 chapters a day, you'll be done. You're done next. Shulchan Aruch. Maran wrote his Shulchan Aruch. I know now it's a lot of books. Maran wrote it in 30 sections, so every day you can learn a section and finish it every month. For who? He said for children and schoolboys. That's what we wrote Shulchan Aruch for. Today, we've made Shulchan Aruch so complicated that forget children and schoolboys. If you wanted to do Shulchan Aruch once every 3 years, you would never be able to finish it. We made it, everything Maran made uncomplicated, we made complicated. It's bad enough what Maran made complicated. Now we made even the uncomplicated parts complicated. That's how Jews work. He wrote a book, so we have no more commentaries. You open up the Shulchan Aruch, there's now 1,000 new commentaries. Shulchan Aruch. It's a cycle. But at the very least, to learn that. And then when a rabbi comes to Beit Knesset and you ask a question about Hilchot Shabbat, you're not asking like a parrot in my cage at home. You're asking a question in Hilchot Shabbat, in Kashrut, in relationships, because you're a Talmid Chacham. And you don't know what it's like to walk down the street as a Talmid Chacham. You don't know what it's like to sit in your chair and say, I understand my tradition. I know what's going on here. And then I have nothing to complain about. Because my children don't have good rabbis to learn from? Great, I'm the rabbi they're going to learn from. My friend, I have nowhere to go, I don't have any friends that think like me, so make friends that think like you. It's all in your hands. To sit and to complain is easy. When I came here, the title of the shiur was Take Back the Reins. I'm not asking you to overthrow the Rabbinate. I'm asking you to identify the members of the Rabbinate that are doing things right and stand behind them. And when you're done standing behind them, aseh l'charav, make them your rabbi. How do you make them your rabbi? Come stand right next to them. Learn Torah just like them. Pray just like them. Be educated just like them. And it's not a matter of 50 years, 100 years, 200 years. Literally overnight, you and I and all of us can change Judaism and the face of Judaism entirely. I believe in that. That's why I'm here today. And I believe that if anybody has a chance, between this Kehillat, between the Chavua that Sina and Rabbi Dweck and Avi Garson are putting together, between all of you who are involved in the regular shiurim that happen in the city, every single one of you is a candidate to stand up and change the face of Judaism. So stop complaining and do something. And when the birds around us chirp, maybe not in French anymore, but in whatever language they chirp, say, you're a bird, I'll put you in a cage. But for me, I will unleash the spirit of the Jewish people. For me, I'm not bringing a shtender to sit outside. I'm not bringing a chair in a place that I don't belong. I'm going to create the place that I do belong. And I'm going to open the doors wide so that all of Israel, Kol Amecha Bet Yisrael, are welcome inside. And I'm telling you, it's not a matter of 100 years. It's a matter of from today until tomorrow, all the complaints that we have will disappear. And not just Chachmat Chachamim Tisrach, but we'll see a generation where Ummala'a ha'aretz de'at Adonai. The world will be filled with the knowledge of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. From like the water fills the ocean, like the sands fill the sea, the world will be filled with a true knowledge of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Who is going to make that choice? Only us. Im lo achshav, and if we don't do it now, when will we possibly do it? B'ezrat Hashem, I look forward not to seeing you again in Tiferet Eyal. I look forward that if we take this and harness this and change our lives, that already by the time Pesach comes around, you and I will be standing on the roof of the Beit HaMikdash together this Pesach to offer our Korban on Erev Chag HaPesach. Thank you so much for having me here. Tiskul Mitzvot. Thank you again to the Rabbanit.